Oh, kia ora koutou. Ko Geoff Canham tuku anōa. Ko te rangirehu te puna ahau. Ko Moao tuku mauna. Ko Waiho tuku awa. Ko Waihi kainga matamata. Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Geoff Canham, and I'm an EnviroHub board member. And 3 years ago now, EnviroHub set up a very interesting conversation in London, England. We'd presented in Paris and in the US on National Park City Biophilic Movement principles and I guess professional best practice. And here we were, the Kiwis touring the world, talking about our beautiful place. And we were invited to the foundation moment in London to be one of the first 10 countries to sign up to the National Park City movement, and we signed the charter. So Laura and I went to London and we signed that. It was a very special moment. And then we brought that kaupapa back to New Zealand, Aotearoa. And with that we began our tangata whenua consultation about this concept. And then we were, I guess, blessed with the tuku of a name of Waiariki Park region. So what is it? What's it all about? Well, Waiariki Park region, well, behind me is quite a chunk of it. A lot of people come to this country and they say, wow, you guys are lucky, you live in a park. This must be amazing what you've done, but it hasn't been by design. So we'll get into what's in it for you and what's it all about for communities, but if you like, it's about our habitat, human habitat. We're at our best and in our best surroundings, and every square metre counts. So we're going to expand on that as we go, but welcome to Waiariki Park region.
Well, I'd like to welcome Geoff Canham, who's one of the speakers for the annual EnviroHub Speakers Forum. And this year, it is a virtual event because of the pandemic circumstances. And in terms of Geoff, he's a principal parks and recreation specialist, accredited parks and recreation professional, and a certified parks professional international. He also runs Thrive Spaces and Places, a specialist parks and recreation consultancy. He has 37 years international experience in parks agency, local government parks and recreation with New Zealand, and international experience in parks and recreation leadership, planning and project management. Geoff's won a multitude of awards for his contributions, has published many articles, and has given more than 15 conference presentations in New Zealand, Australia and the US. He is the current chair of the Industry Accreditation Board for the New Zealand Recreation Association, and he currently volunteers for Bay of Plenty National Park City/region. He also serves on the Minister of Conservation's Advisory Board for Stewardship Land, Mangataltri Reserve Committee, the Bay of Plenty Enviro Board and convenes the New Zealand Parks Leaders Forum. He was also instrumental in the inception of the Waiariki Park Region Initiative. So a warm welcome to you, Geoff.
Kia ora, Bill. Thank you. That was a lovely introduction. Thanks.
And given that range of experience and longevity in the parks and recreation space, really looking forward to in terms of going through a number of questions and really having a discussion on a number of matters related to urban greening, which is the topic in terms of our discussion today. So probably if I kick off, Geoff, in terms of, given urban greening is the topic, perhaps if you can outline to us what is urban greening, tell us a bit more about the concept and how important it is in terms of a piece of the puzzle for the Waiariki Park Region Initiative.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Bill, and kia ora, everyone. Urban greening is probably more of an appropriation of a modern term. And look, we're a species that have always had greening in our heart and in our minds. We're a species that pretty much have moved from bay to bay, probably using up the easy resources, and then as a fairly tribal species, being tempted by the next bay or the next coast or the next land that has more of those resources. And that's how our species is spread around the globe. I guess the urban greening is very relevant because now, weirdly, most humans live in an urban centre around the world. It's about 83% of the billions of us live in a fully urban environment, which is a bit weird. There's never been more of us, but we've never been more concentrated in an urban setting. The interesting thing about New Zealand is we actually exceed that. So we're sitting around 87% in terms of our population that lives in an urban centre. And that's often surprising to Kiwis, because we think of ourselves in this great big park, this great big green land, but actually we're definitely urban dwellers. The urban greening side of it is something which isn't necessarily new to people. Our grandparents had massive vegetable gardens. Instinctively, when people buy a new house, they might plant a lemon tree, get the grass growing, and get some green into their lives. And I'd like to expand a bit about why that green infrastructure is very, very important. Actually, if we're going to survive as a species and actually do things within ourselves, for ourselves, to make it better for ourselves, we're the only species that wants to make it better for ourselves. We're the only species that tells stories and resolves things through imagination. And that's really weird. We run on a number of fictions, and all these things are really at the heart of what has never gone away for us, that green and nature is hardwired into us. It doesn't matter if we live in an apartment, if we haven't been there, we do this. If we have 1 week of holiday, look at the number of people that will talk about going to a beautiful place, to re-energize, to relax, be ready for the next onslaught of work at the very least. But what if that green, that urban green, that beautiful place was where you lived, and you didn't have to go across the globe or down to Fiordland to have an experience with a beautiful place?
So just on that, so how would you see that urban greening concept apply in terms of the Waiariki Park Region Initiative? Would you see that working?
Well, the way it works is it's not necessarily a big leap. I think it's a case, in some respects, of getting a better story. At the moment, we use a different roadmap. We use a roadmap to sort of identify locations and where we are. We don't necessarily see the green as much as we do, but there's a lot of it around. I think the Waiariki Park region story is where it's a collective impact. It's about individual efforts. Every square metre counts. It's what we do with our own land, whether we're a tenant or we're lucky enough to own a place. It's even the public realm. People want to be involved. And just a quick reflection, Bill, I'm an ex-parks manager. When I started off, it was about formal parks, cricket greens, individual tree specimens planted in a very Victorian approach, clipped edges, and people would complain if there wasn't enough, foliferous display on roundabouts. That business has fundamentally changed. The modern parks manager still has to do all that. People still complain if it's not like that, which increasingly is the minority. Increasingly, people practically expect their surroundings to be greener, there to be an opportunity for those ecosystem services to serve themselves. And there's a number of things that come from having a greener infrastructure around us. So Waiariki Park region is a bit of a collective effort. It's all those things coming together, but then like sustainable backyards or every square metre counts, it's the small things we do, and that's pretty much what's going to carry it. We want to celebrate what's done now. That's the first thing, establish some baselines. And we are the first part of New Zealand that's actually laid claim to the national park region. And 3 years ago, EnviroHub went to London and signed on behalf of New Zealand into the International Charter, one of first 10 cities, in our case region, to sign up to that International Charter, the only New Zealand entity to do that. And since then, other parts of New Zealand are copying, which is great. We've led the way.
Well, just on that note, what are some of the other countries or overseas areas that have signed up to such an initiative?
Well, if you go around the houses, Bill, there's places like London. I think Adelaide's in the middle of that at the moment. Singapore certainly is wanting to get there. We have this huge advantage here in New Zealand in that it's already quite green. If you look at, and I did an international review of open space strategies around the world, look at a place like Paris that has hardly any parks. There's not many places to do it, so they definitely use streets and walls and roofs, and this is where most of the National Park City movement is concentrated on. It's bringing green where there's actually none. And that's a crisis. So if you look at another crisis like Melbourne, they have calculated within 5 years, there will be a 50-degree centigrade day. And they're calling the urban greening a health emergency, because they know the day that it gets to 50, statistically and very tragically, 1,000 people will die in the city of Melbourne when it hits 50 degrees centigrade through the inequity of, who can afford air conditioning and people with health conditions and so forth. And that is entirely preventable if that temperature comes down. And the only way to get that down is to de-seal the earth, change the street environment, see that green infrastructure having a role to prevent a public health emergency. And they are taking that as seriously over there as they do bushfires, and it's a full project. They are literally ripping up streets and putting in more gardens, more green area, just to cool down the city. And in New Zealand, we're a bit lucky we don't necessarily have, that concentration of heat sinking in cities, but it's still an issue. So I guess where that's an international issue being reflected in New Zealand is where we've probably got some natural advantages, but a lot of our urban form is kind of going the wrong way still, incredibly, for all our natural advantages.
And well, just teasing it out a bit further, and you have given the example of Melbourne and its 50-degree days. So how do you see the urban greening as to address, say, climate change and potential ongoing increases in temperature and rainfall increases, etc.?
Well, it's critical in terms of the way we think about it. We need to think about it as green infrastructure. So every other form of infrastructure has coalesces around a national policy statement. It's often legislated for. It happens because it has to. If you don't, you get into trouble if you work for an agency. Weirdly, in New Zealand, there's no law that says we have to have parks or a certain amount of parks. There's no national policy statement for green infrastructure, for tree canopy, and the very services that serve us for our human habitat. it's really important to us because when it's green around us, we learn better. We recover better from illness. We have better cognitive stamina. Property prices are better. Economically, more people want to come to a beautiful place. And many tourist campaigns focus on that. For Bay of Plenty, already the RTO, the Tourism Bay of Plenty's strategy it's in our nature. And we know in New Zealand that's pretty much what's carrying us in terms of a lot of economic sides. If the water's good, we can farm. So there's all that productive stuff. But in cities where we live, if we've got that green infrastructure, and here's a weird one, if you've got a really good leafy environment, crime drops. And crime is directly related to the amount of canopy cover in a town, based on some fantastic and fascinating US evidence. So all those things need to serve our human habitat. We're better people. We're more productive. Everything about us is better, physical and mental health. And these are things that we sort of know, but we've almost had this severed relationship with nature, and we need to get it back. Nature's typically something that happens over there, or it happens in a national park, and we go there because that's where we've ring-fenced nature, because we don't live there. We live in a place that we've civilized, and made it more comfortable. I guess what National Park region and Waiariki Park region in particular for Bay of Plenty is bringing the nature back to where you live, nature-based solutions to infrastructure, and to your point, even cooling where we live to save power, and to make it, I guess, a little bit cooler in summer, a little bit warmer in winter by taking out the edge of the climate change and the environment, perhaps serving us more, and even right down to the way we use it now for engineering. Stormwater and rainwater gardens, wetlands, doing some heavy lifting on cleansing water before it reaches the coast, obviously pollution. Those projects are happening right now in Tauranga. And it's interesting, if you look at the time scale, it's only sort of 5-7 years ago we weren't doing some of these things, but we're doing them now, and there's great leadership in Tauranga, for example, making it happen.
So what's required, in your view, to achieve perhaps that greater community understanding, including the benefits of urban greening, together with people understanding the Waiariki Park initiative?
Well, I think in terms of the initiative, what can I do as a person? This is huge. This is a whole region. And I'm not about to go out and plant a street because I need permission for that. And that someone else does that sort of thing, don't they? When you look at this across the world, it's been about ground up. London's got some great examples around collective impact, and it's really street by street level. And what they've found is that it's every square meter counts. So on one hand, it's a movement. So people, a bit like any app, you can join it, you can join an online network community, and you can be validated for your efforts, whether they are sowing some seeds in some bare land, registering something you've changed for the better. And that's very much the European way of doing this. They pretty much operate community by community of interest, and then there's programs run by the councils and so forth. But when you join it all together, you get a better story, and that's what the National Park City movement's all about. Waiariki is the same. We've got the website platform, and it's a bit like the Wednesday Challenge. It's interesting when you start to register your efforts, and that's pretty much how the community, if they go to the website, away you go. And it's down to for us, it's a bit like predator free. Who would have thought that would be successful? I remember years ago people thought it might be a bit nanny state, but now you've got the diesel truck guys standing on barbecues talking about their pest control. It's become the way we do things around here. And I think subtly, if it's not an authority or a leadership sort of entity telling you what to do, because New Zealanders hate that. New Zealanders don't have a lot of respect for regulation and or anything. But we are at our best with this sort of stuff, like predator free. My overseas colleagues in the States just really envy how we get to certain points. But I think it's about our narrative. It's about our better story. It's about our values and telling them back to each other. Waiariki Park region's gone somewhere really well because of the tangata whenua engagement. And we've been, just blessed with the extent of that and how many values and I guess, better stories we've had. Because Te Taiao was, you ask any country how they're doing with their national park city, it's really surprising they haven't gone to their Indigenous peoples or their First Nations peoples first and had that courageous conversation about how are we doing. And I think that's our success, more so than most countries.
So you see that as perhaps one of the more unique characteristics of the initiative here.
Absolutely, especially with Waiariki Park region. I think the moment we started this, when we got back from London, we went to Tangata Whenua, and it was really interesting when we talked evangelically about biophilic principles and nature-based solutions and all these things we'd found a language for. You know, Tangata Whenua are always very tolerant and always received the guests very well. But at the end of many of these discussions, Iwi would say, well, thanks, you've caught up. Everything we talk about is about the land, the whenua, we are giving you stories the whole time to relate to our surroundings and each other as people. It's a bit like you've finally got it. And that act of passing the story on, sharing what's important. When we come together as strangers, we quickly talk about things like family, our surroundings, where we live. And that's at the nub of it. Humans at their best are really good with the environment. It's natural to us.
So you just covered off beforehand in terms of these types of initiatives, very much in terms of ground up, as opposed to the top-down authority type agencies imposing such direction or requirements.
Yes.
Having said that, what do you see the role is of, say, local government agencies, central government, other agencies in terms of the contribution to urban greening, encouraging the awareness and understanding of it, and achieving that long-term commitment to it?
It's a critical point, Bill. I mean, there's obviously no point people doing really good work if it's going to be undone behind them. The challenge we have at a high level in New Zealand, and I'm currently working with the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment's office on this right now, is that we don't have a national policy statement for green infrastructure. That is a massive issue because as a former parks manager for a council, I know how much energy the community put into ideas and initiatives and volunteering. And often you can see that just being, it perpetuates for the life of that energy. And after a 10-year tour of duty at Tauranga City Council, for example, you can feel that's really draining because it comes down to realizing that if somebody isn't doing that, it will, unless you can find someone else that's similarly minded to sort of put that much into it, it's a bit like the luck of chance, the fact that there's no actual legal reason for this stuff to happen in terms of parks being provided, or that streets and green find their way into the conversations with district plans and roading developments. So green infrastructure is the missing piece. Hopefully the new spatial law and then obviously the changes with the RMA, but even then there's no leverage for policy planners, district planners to actually have to have regard for a national policy statement around that green infrastructure serving us where we live and being a part of the budget conversation, or being part of the context for developing best practice for where we live, new and old environments. So that's critical because I think it's a high and low. When you get that right, the people in charge of the really big numbers do things that currently I would suggest are happening by chance. So we have a lot of beautiful plantings next to highway developments, and so on and so on. Developers putting in, some level of human habitat creation when they develop a subdivision. In my experience, that's mostly people leading, and it feels good, so it happens. But all those budgets are pretty much discretionary. And I've seen the legal opinions and district plan challenges. Pretty much, if you don't want to do those things, you're on safe ground. There's engineering standards, there's national policy statements for other species and certain special areas.
but not for exactly where we live. There's no requirement to provide lots of green spaces that we need. That, in my opinion, is more by luck and good chance and lucky leadership where you can find it to make that happen. There's too much demands on the good land, and there's more of us, and that's climate change and so on and so on. That's the missing piece. I think I have a lot of faith in communities, having done this for decades, in that I think communities are pretty reasonable. There's the reasonable person test around the barbecue. Is this going to work or not? And people do their own thing. So I think it's a movement up from the bottom and better stuff from the top. And in fact, New Zealand, for everything we say we are, is way behind the world in terms of that legislative analysis of what we're missing. So I'm hoping the PCE, or the Parliamentary Commissioner, will look at that area more.
So just in terms of the comparison of what's happening or happened overseas in terms of urban green spaces, what does that look like compared to in this nation?
Well, first of all, there's some really good work to show that we're doing quite well. So, for example, Professor Bruce Clarkson from the Waikato has shown that in Tauranga, for example, Tauranga punches above its weight with the way it's treated land, that, like gullies and stream systems. There's a lot of native replanting, dune care. Tauranga can be proud. It's a bit of an exemplar, and it needs to build on that. I think, back to what we need to do in this country and our comparison with others, we're very lucky. So we still have quite a consumptive land model. So Tauranga, again, is a great example. A lot of single dwellings that are 1 story high and a big garage at the front. And again, this is my thing about urban greening. A lot of covenants arrive as to how that house should be built. So there's not a lot of land left to grow a pumpkin, for example, afterwards. So that whole food security will be an emerging thing. Overseas, I think we're seeing people doing what they can. So there's a lot more roof gardens, wall gardens, some really good innovation with de-sealing the earth. So, trying to reduce the car dominance, and introducing, wherever possible, planters and gardens, and a lot of actually quite movement type stuff where completely unauthorized gardening is happening, which it feels good, because when people garden, they say that's spiritual and it's rewarding. It is very good for you. But if you don't have that opportunity at all, say if you're overseas, you don't have the level of home ownership or access or equity that we might say we do here, then it's a bit more militant on one level. But there's a lot more, nudges on corporates and buildings and councils in, say, the Northern Hemisphere. So there's benefits to have a green wall. There's price breaks. If you look at, though, the retail sector, forget legislation, they've embraced this. So people know about Singapore and then the fantastic airport gardens. But if you do a quick look at the really profitable retail around the world, let's pick on Tauranga CBD for a moment. Great retail is gone away from the malls with no clocks and artificial everything, light and heat, to attract people and make them shop more. It's turned out through research that in a green environment, people walk slower, are more social, and spend more time and are more relaxed than they are in a mall, but they do spend more. And they're more likely to spend more time in a beautiful environment, and by virtue of that, return and lengthen their shopping experience, which goes against everything that retail was saying for so long. So that's a massive trend from overseas. I've actually given presentations internationally, and I've used, apologies to Tauranga, the CBD there, because if you look at the way CBDs are regenerating around the world, they are doing what Tauranga is doing now with Elizabeth Street and bringing back the green. And it's a tough discussion to have around car parking convenience and Kiwis are there's not a lot of public transport, so you're almost obliged to take a car. But urban greening faces that one head on. And when you look at internationally successful examples, it's not necessarily at the expense of transport. It's an and, not an or. So I think for Tauranga CBD, there's a lot to work with in terms of structure, but the plans that council already has about more green, and making it a really pleasant place to be. So central London's doing it, and we probably will see in this country a little bit more of that green walls, stormwater reuse, and probably a different building construction to sort of use the opportunities a bit more around that urban environment being a really nice place to be where you might rejuvenate. So there's a bit of a long answer, but on every front, it's fascinating. New York are ripping up streets and putting in big stormwater gardens. That means that their water quality in the river, and we've got the same issue with harbours and lakes, is much better. But and curiously, it means that people are much better off in those streets across the four well-beings as we measure them in New Zealand and these statistics. And coming back to the other one, less crime due to more vegetation. So that's
I am fascinated by by your comment on crime. So have you sourced some research regarding that?
Yes.
In another forum, I'd be interested in
yes.
having a discussion with you around those matters.
Yep. Every tree counts. So they proved in the US that every single tree statistically counts for crime. And I'd love to talk about it. Maybe there's not enough time today. But if you remove trees, you get more crime. So that, yeah.
I'll come back to you on that matter another time. But just in terms of the urban greening, do you reference, and particularly with intensification of urban areas and a lot of sections and lots are smaller, there's probably limitations in terms of perhaps some of the extensive greening that may have occurred. Do you see the focus of it more on the public spaces, whether the parks, the laneways, the residential streets, as making the biggest gains in that urban greening approach?
Absolutely. I think we've got a little journey to go through in New Zealand, and it's not just really intensely growing places like Tauranga. It is about a different urban form. So there's a lot of work around probably a real mix of building form around the developments that we are tearing people through their stages of life and their stages of, say, tenancy or home ownership, but creating settings where it's not necessarily about roading and engineering standards. So there's some challenge there. So streets don't necessarily have to be wide, and a lot of with respect to councils, a lot of our decisions are based on the capacity to sort of deal with complaints. People will complain about everything. I can't turn my car around, I can't turn my vehicle around on the street with a trailer because it's not wide enough. But I think for us to go forward, we would have to look at the way that has been dealt with overseas. I mean, the US is miles ahead of us for new developments. For example, in the US and Australia, the council will be very much a joint partner, and TCC did this with Waipuna Park in Welcome Bay, but as a joint developer, as it were, creating a beautiful setting, a place where there's a park and greenways and canopy, and then that sets the scene for the development. And the US does this really well with parkways. Australia, they're very assertive with this sort of model where they will literally buy a farm and determine that'll be a growth area based on environmental yield. If you're a developer, you get more income for sections in a beautiful place. And we tend to do it the wrong way here. So Mokoroa I used to live there, my property was developed. What happens is all the soil comes off, it's a scorched earth, and through the course of the development, once the services are in, they try and bring back that nature. There's some really good developments where that nature gets to stay in place, and the infrastructure isn't to a very big gold standard, but it is in a way that the public realm has some flexibility with it. We don't have to seal all the roads. We can have Melbourne are doing porous roading, letting the rain have a relationship with the earth, and actually maybe detuning some of this stuff. We don't have to pipe everything. Letting stuff soak away, giving a place for nature to happen, and actually not producing homes that one type, if you like. Yeah.
So what would you see as the biggest challenge with urban greening developments at the moment?
I think at the moment, it would probably horrify people to know there's actually very little protection of our parks that we know in New Zealand. So we have a Reserves Act, 1977, but I've seen the legal opinions from barristers and they can get around that. They're not that well protected. That's one thing, that's parks we have, but actually there's no national policy statement that says we have to have them anyway. There's no law that says there has to be parks. And by natural extension of that, there's not a lot of specific leverage on policy development and development full stop, even including roading systems and other infrastructure, to have green at the table. It's pretty much the add-on at the end. So I think that is the major challenge for us, to have some form of discussion as a country about how we're going to make human habitat part of what we do, because everything else gets a very high unquestioned status. On one extreme of that, it's easy to have a road building discussion and, how come that happens, I think the issues of what we're trying to do is effectively retrofit the four well-beings across an urban environment that we are provided with. And with respect to the people that do that, they're doing their job. It's well planned. The engineering standards are involved. The economic stuff comes in about the efficiency of it. But there needs to be, if you like, nature included in that. And what makes us better as people, what serves us as better human habitat. We know that people walking past each other in a street with no trees won't greet each other. It's all the evidence is there. In a leafy environment, strangers will greet each other, and so on. The case for this, I think, is instead of retrofitting everything like Tauranga CBD, trying to rescue it and make it better, what if we started with something that served us? And if the environment was at the table, if the environment was seated at the head of that table with the engineers and everyone else, what would it say?
Just teasing that out a bit further, for that to occur, is that more a change in how, whether it's local government or developers or others operate, as opposed to getting environment at the table being driven by a legislative requirement? I'm just trying to tease out the best way to, might be both things, but to achieve that, for want of a better word, that cultural change or approach.
So I'm going to stick my neck out a bit with an opinion here. I think over the decades, I've seen so many people work into a process with a lot of everything we want being in place at the beginning. So the developer will suggest a very green development. The roading engineer might start off with quite a bold plan to have canopy cover in a new road. When it comes down to it, when it gets to a governance table of, say, councillors, or it goes through a couple of heavy rounds of an annual plan in the council, at the end of the day, it gets more and more watered down. And in my experience, that happens because when it gets tough, and these things are tough, running a city is hard. Being a developer and trying to have some sort of, economic outcome to working with everyone is hard. Consultation's hard. Public engagement, the tyranny of the commons, everybody wants something for themselves. We're the only species that wants to make it better for ourselves. So then you get a lot of everything. Politics. How do you resolve green infrastructure in a political environment? So you get a lot of something that pops out the end naturally, and that's who we are. I think what we're seeing is more of the constituency, more of democracy saying, hang on, we want more green, we want a better place. But fundamentally, unless we've got at least a national policy statement for this, it will remain to be a discretionary, high energy lobbying discussion from people who, aren't happy with Cameron Road, or they think that the, $1 billion on a motorway should be different. That whole argument thing is going to happen anyway, but it's very emotive because there's no fallback position. If you're an engineering component of a project, there's a fallback position that you have. There's a standard of width, and if you had a cheap ceiling compound on top. Well, that doesn't meet standards, so you don't get that. The quick thing is, I would love people to look at parks in the way that we look at, say, Waka Kotahi looks at roads. So at the moment, there's no data kept, hardly at all, for, say, green infrastructure or parks at a national level, because you can't get the budget. If I, as a parks manager, went to my decision makers and said, look, I need $500,000 a year just to work out who's using this and what the benefits would be, it would never get through the budget process. But at Waka Kotahi, you could spend, 20 million on just data and just finding out who uses the roads, where the busy parts are. And under that model, when it gets busy, you build another one. Now, that would never happen for parks or the environment in New Zealand. If the Moa base track got to 2 million people going around it instead of 1.2, would that mean another regional park would be acquired and developed? At the moment, no. So there's a huge inequity in the way we think of infrastructure in that respect.
Okay. So in terms of 2 or 3 other questions I'd like to pose,
Yep.
Are there any projects in the Waiariki region that we can look forward to or learn about in the near future?
I think it fundamentally comes back to where we live. I think the really exciting thing about Waiariki Park region is the sort of campaigns like sustainable backyards, and look, every square metre counts. And there's projects to simply register the trees you've planted or do something, create, as Rude Kleinpass would say, just create an insect hotel. This movement internationally is typified by doing, it's the individualism, it's the collective impact. So we have quite an easy run. Overseas, the National Park region talks about trying to create habitat in an apartment block, whereas we, through Waiariki Park region, will be running a series of things to do where you are, things to do as a workplace, small things. Every single plant counts, every bit of land that we can, say, cultivate, because soil likes nothing more than being cultivated. It could be the act of just planting a pot of vegetables that will feed you. There's great programs in Waiariki. One of them is learn how to grow kumara. So that the whole thing of what's the purpose of this, we know with food security and growing food, it's often a social imperative, the act of giving a cauliflower over the fence. So this is, if it's better for us, and Nelson Mandela was right, we make better choices out of hope than fear. And it's that whole optimism, where we live, nature serving us, even down to the level of how we might work with our local authorities around planting days. There's many corporates do voluntary sponsorship, and there's the whole act of registering your efforts as part of Waiariki Park region. And then go to the schools. There's a number of programs that under that umbrella of measuring our successes and turning things around. It's all about a movement. It's a bit like logging on to something, the biggest social media network you've ever been a part of. And it's growing. I'm a little bit talking around it because a lot of these initiatives will come from the community. It's not for Waiariki Park region to say, we're having a planting day or we're going to learn how to grow pumpkin. It's a feedback loop. It's user definable. That's the beauty of it.
So essentially, it's really creating the environment for those community initiatives to get underway, to thrive and be connected in with one another. That's right.
Well, why just exist when you can thrive, Yeah. And we like thriving. And I think in terms of what's motivating the people that we've worked with and talked to, there's simple things done well. At a street level, getting to know your neighbours and maybe planting a berm, and maybe incurring the wrath of the road control authority or having an engagement with them about that. Vacant land being cultivated, working with each other to create something at the school. And that's typically how that's unfolding across New Zealand, more than some of the things you see overseas. So we're not necessarily rushing to plant our rooftops or attaching things to our walls because we've got leaky homes and different buildings. So one size doesn't fit all. And we'll create what's good for us. Yeah.
some of those initiatives you just outlined rely on obviously public space or similar. What are things that an individual or a family could do in their own back or front yards to be part of that urban greening initiative, that in terms of some individual commitment or responsibility to urban greening?
Well, we talk about the power of a packet of seeds. You know, a tree from a garden centre is not a cheap thing, but a packet of seeds is, and you can, you know, for a few dollars buy some seed. I think what a household could do is just perhaps imagine how their own habitat could be better. And even as a tenant, well, what could the landlord do to help, instead of just having a mowing contractor coming around and just cutting the grass? And I don't know why we cut grass the way we do. It's like we don't like it. You know, we spend a lot of effort and petrol cutting grass. You know, what could we cultivate that land instead? You know, I've worked for a local authority where people were quick, not a large number of people, but a small number of people were quick to say, well, the grass is long, you know, it's a crisis. So what? You know, one option could be let your grass grow and let it fill up with native butterflies and moths. So I think looking at where you live in a habitat sense is a good move. Maybe embrace the untidy. I've spent my whole life controlling weeds, but weeds are plants too. And I think if you've got something that you can snack on, this is good for you. If your family or your flatmates, you know, can do a little bit of gardening, you know, get your hands muddy, you know, plant some seeds. So what if it fails? You've had a laugh, you've done something, but most of us can grow a carrot, right? Provide for self. And that's where the 1 meter challenge comes in. If this is a challenge back to an audience, is okay, let's just chunk it right down. A square meter, you can take a step in each direction, make a square, cultivate it. What will you put in that with a packet of seeds? Will it be flowers? Will it be, you know, some basic vegetable crop? What will you do? You know, will you harvest some seed? Yeah, there's been some really good visionary stuff in Tauranga. Why can't we have wood pigeon in our streets? And the power of a simple vision and the power of a story to do something like that.
We're quite delighted. We had wood pigeon recently arrive, so we've had plenty of tours. So they come and feast on the native trees. So it's great.
Good.
So final, in terms of wrapping up the session, Geoff, what would your take-home message to the audience, to those who are listening, be?
I think the take-home audience is probably going to wonder, well, how, you know, what do I have to do? You know, it seems like something else. Actually, I think that the message is that every tree counts, every plant counts. And you have it within your power to do something which you've been hardwired with for, you know, more than 10 million years. We're at a bit of a crisis point that we have to teach people how to grow vegetables. You know, this sort of thing about our relationship with nature, it needs to improve. So I guess the take-home message is, it's a question. How will you improve your relationship with nature? How will you create a better habitat for yourself? The benefits, there's a long list. You come out of it better off in any version at all. I would even say to some of those people that might be used to complaining to a council about their trees, that tree's making your property go up, and it's making your street have less crime. So I'll introduce a bit of controversy to that. And nature isn't clean and tidy. It just doesn't do that. It's not fitted standard. So embrace nature. Think about how you can have a better relationship with it. How can you make it work for you? What's in it for you? You know, think about that. And finally, go to the Waiariki Park Region website, because it's a story that's building with the community, with people. No council, no agency is going to save the world from climate change. It's only going to come from us as individuals, working as we do when we're best at being humans, and that's doing what we do as humans really well. We imagine, we tell stories, we get a better story. And what's your story going to be?
Okay, well, thanks very much, Geoff, and thank you for the passion you bring in terms of urban greening. obviously based on many decades of experience in the parks and the recreation arena, and certainly in terms of outlining the role of the Waiariki Park initiative, and certainly the clarity that it's an initiative in terms of individuals, community, bottom up, and the contribution that people can make. I think that acknowledging the thinking around what can happen at a national level, and in particular the national policy statement approach in terms of green infrastructure and the current gap that there is now in terms of any national direction. So obviously the opportunity there for people to think about that further and what may need to occur to actually start some further discussions and awareness in Wellington around such an initiative. And also then bringing it back in terms of what individuals can do in terms of their own environment and habitat, and really, I think just acknowledging the challenge you have left listeners in terms of every tree and plant counts, and the challenge of how you as an individual or a family would improve the relationship with nature. So thank you for that. And you have raised a number of matters that I suspect will provide food for thought and debate as part of this speakers forum. So thank you.
Thank you, Will. That's a great summary. Thanks very much.
Cheers.
Cheers. Ka kite.
We find lots and lots of references these days to Mātauranga Māori. I've just finished a 2-day panel with MB looking at Vision Mātauranga research projects. Mātauranga Māori has become a big monster that actually intrudes into people's lives. It seems to be so complicated and quite esoteric, when I use that sort of big word. It's not like that at all. And if that's what we think, we've actually missed the point. And the people trying to teach us have missed the point. Remember that the people who came to New Zealand first weren't Māori. They were Pacific Islanders. And they lived in a world where they could actually rely on coconuts, for example, to provide food and water and stuff like this, and so many of those tropical fruits. And when they arrived in New Zealand, Aotearoa, completely different world. You know, just imagine those people when the first time it snowed. My godfathers, they never had that in Hawaii. The first frost. I remember seeing some ducks in Timaru many years ago, and the lake that they swam in was frozen over. And these ducks landed on the lake, and they went for a mighty great skid for huge distances. Quite astonishing. What a shock. Well, that's the sort of shock Māori would have had, or those first Polynesian people would have found when they first encountered New Zealand's climate. Mātauranga is the knowledge of the land held by the people who belong to the land, and is the result of living with the land for hundreds of years, looking and listening and learning, harvesting, collecting, all the time growing deeper and deeper connections to it, learning its rhythms, learning its patterns, so that they can become part of that pattern, so that they could survive. Now, that's what Mātauranga Māori is. It's the fruits of that journey that's been going on for nearly 1,000 years. So when you look at the settlers that arrived post Captain Cook, they began the same journey. Just imagine, like, for example, I've heard that the people in Canterbury, some of them, when they built their new houses, they had the verandas facing the sun, the morning sun, as it is in England. And of course they had a lovely sunny morning but no sun in the afternoon, because they hadn't quite worked out that in the southern hemisphere things are opposite to what they are in the north hemisphere. And for a long time they tried to recreate England back here in New Zealand. New Zealanders are beginning to realise this is a southern hemisphere country, and this is home, and we've got to learn. We've got to adapt ourselves to living in the southern hemisphere land. So we've got to follow the same journey that Māori had to make when they first came here. So how do we learn mātauranga Māori? We learn it from the whenua. We learn it from listening and watching and hearing. But we're lucky now, most of all, we can learn it from the people who have been here longest. You know, because when you look at it really, Māori, the concept of owning land, I just couldn't get their head around it. How can you own the land? The land was here before I turned up, and it's still going to be here after I die, so how come I say I own it? You know, it's their belonging that matters. And so the more that New Zealanders feel they belong to this land, the better they're going to be able to understand what is meant by mātauranga Māori, because it's the knowledge of the land from the people who belong to the land, who make this place their home. Now maybe looking at it that way, it becomes much more accessible. So when you look at it in a sense, we're all becoming Māori, aren't we? In a way, in that sense. You know, a tangata whenua to me isn't a person who can say, well, my great-great-grandfather had a house here, therefore I'm a tangata whenua, even though I live in New York. A tangata whenua is a person who can hear the land talking. And you can only hear that talking if you stop and listen. When the settlers arrived here from Europe, they didn't stop and listen. They just went like crazy to build their homes, and that's understandable. Now is the time for us to stop and listen, because our landscape isn't very well. Our water, we used to be able to drink water when we were kids. When I was a kid, I never took a water bottle anywhere because there was a stream and I could drink it. I wouldn't dare do that now because I'd end up with giardia and diarrhea for weeks afterwards, you know. We know our land is not well. We need to listen to our land and let the land teach us. We need to focus on actually healing our land so that we can be well. And that's really, to me, the kaupapa of the Waiariki National Park, to make our land well so we can be well, because when the land is well, we are well. The biggest challenge with mātauranga Māori is that people think it's an exclusive thing. You know, it belongs to Māori and therefore I shouldn't touch it. And sometimes you find people who will talk that way, you know, some people who are Māori in actual fact. I really think we need to stop back and think. You know, same with learning te reo, you know. Lots and lots of people say, oh, that doesn't make sense. But remember, this is a language that actually has come out of this land. Te reo Māori is the sound of our land. And this is and so therefore it's the language of the place that we call home. You know, and so basically, instead of seeing it as being a frightening thing or a challenging thing, see it as an opportunity to actually connect better. I remember years ago I was doing a workshop up near Kirikiri, and there was a Dutchman on the workshop, and we went through our usual thing of naming the trees and all that sort of stuff. And the next day he said to me, when I went home last night, I've been in New Zealand for many, many years, but this was the first time I felt like this was home. And I said, oh, how come? I was quite astonished. He said, I've been driving past those trees for nearly 20 years, and for the first time I knew their names, and somehow I actually felt at home. You know, lots of our stresses in our society is that people still feel a bit awkward about being here. Mātauranga Māori is a way of actually building the connections to give us a sense of home. The key to it isn't Māori, the key to it is the whenua. Learning to know this land and learning to understand this land, learning to see ourselves as part of it, and then in actual fact, our biggest responsibility is to look after it. And you know, that doesn't sound very political, I suppose. Mātauranga Māori has become quite political, but I think that's a shame, because when you start politicising things and putting up barriers and having debates, we're actually blocking the pathways that help us to learn. And so really I'm hoping more and more for us who call ourselves New Zealanders, Kiwi, people who belong to Aotearoa. You know, good when we stop calling New Zealand, which is some little place in Holland, which is special to the people that live there, and calling ourselves Aotearoa. Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. We in actual fact develop a sense of not just belonging, but a sense of responsibility, of caring. You know, our big challenge in the future is to help every single person who lives in the Bay of Plenty to realise that we are responsible for keeping it well. That's the whole kaupapa of the Kaimai Mamaku forum that's beginning to really get going. It's giving us a sense of caring. And so, well, I think we've got to take the whole question of mātauranga within that context. And then lots of the things that worry us or scare us or make us angry, actually those things become unimportant. What is important is in actual fact use the knowledge of the land to care for the land, and that's where Mātauranga Māori, you know, all the time, you know, ka ora te whenua, ka ora te tangata, and the land is well, people are well, all the time relate that back to our journey. You know, one of the things that really comes through to me, because I travel the country and work so much with natural places, just how much energy there is in the land to be well. You know, and even though I see lots of things that worry me, you know, I see so many incredible people, and I have the chance to meet so many of them, and that's what inspires me. And you know, we worry about our future, we worry about our young people, we worry about this, that, and everything else like this. But my experience has been actually there's so much goodness around. All we have to do is harness it. And I really do believe that if we can actually connect together and work together well enough, these problems that actually confront us will be challenges that we actually attempt and succeed with. And I really, really believe it. And so often I get so tired that I really have trouble even standing up, literally. But in actual fact, I can't sort of get over the fact that actually we can do this, you know. And the thing is, and lots of people are saying that. And really, I don't have to do much except encourage, you know. And the bits that I can share with people are really words of encouragement, not just sort of profound utterances of knowledge that other people don't have, you know. We can do all sorts of things if we're appreciated and if we're encouraged. And maybe one of our big lacks these days is we mark people, we score people, we don't actually encourage people. And really, I think it's much more important. You know, we assess people and all this sort of stuff, you know. And I suppose the other thing is, you know, and we make excuses for ourselves all the time, you know. But I'm inspired by the possibilities. So to me, the 21st century is like the 15th century, 16th century, the beginning of the Renaissance, when the whole world changed over what was beginning to happen over that 100 or so years. Now we live in another time like that. We live at a time in which the whole world is going through a transformation. and we are responsible for making that transformation, rather than, as so many people will say, we're responsible for its destruction. I don't think, you know, I don't agree with that. I just hope I don't lose my nerve. You know, that can happen. Eh? You can say, oh, now it's like going on a run. Am I going to get to the finish line? Nah, and then I give up. No, at this stage, I don't really feel like I'm going to give up. I might flake out, but I won't give up. The answer to our future doesn't lie with the politicians. You know, politicians are so constricted by the realities. Here in New Zealand, every 3 years there's an election, you know, and so therefore there's not much time between elections for them to really get on and do things. You have the big meetings overseas when all the big chiefs from the different countries meet together and set these climate change goals and stuff like this, which have got to go home and sell to their people, and especially sell to their business people, you know, and so on and so on and so on. So if we wait for the politicians to sort it, the world will be ended before they get there. We are the solution to the problem. We've got to actually make it happen. Remember, politicians don't lead opinion, they follow it. You know, and so if we stop sort of expecting the impossible from them and actually start connecting ourselves to each other and working together for the sake of us, not for the sake of our shareholders, not for the sake of the next balance sheet where it looks good and I can retire with a big package. No, if we in actual fact focus on actually looking after our world, we can actually meet all those climate change processes, targets and things like this, you know. The politicians do lots of good things. They try and set up a bus service here in Tauranga and in other cities and towns and roundabout. We don't like that because we want our independence. Hey, part of the future is we've got to sacrifice some of the independence we say is necessary and learn to work and live together. And we're not doing that. We're like children, and it's time for us to grow up. And I can say that because I'm still a child in lots of ways. I'm still selfish, but somehow I've got to get over it. And I've been trying for years, but still not doing too good. But that's the challenge we all face, and no excuses. You can't say, oh, I'm too old now, we'll leave it for the young ones. Now, us old people, we've got to lead, not by telling, but by example. You know, we don't get to the stage, well, I'm 65 now and I can retire. No, you can retire from your job. Now you're an elder. An elder's job is to guide with quiet wisdom that only older people have in most cases. You know, so really, we look to the younger. Us old people find young people very useful because we can blame them for anything. In actual fact, young people have become what they are, maybe because we maybe weren't the leaders that those young people needed for inspiration. You know, we sort of set goals that in actual fact have become their goals, and now we realise that those goals might actually be contributing to our problems. So maybe the last thing to say is, us older people, stop moaning, let's put on a smile and lead. Lead with gentleness, lead with wisdom, lead with encouragement, and actually pay back on the criticising. You know, people see, you know, angry people on TV because they make good TV, you know, but I'm just amazed travelling up and down the country, and I have been, how many wonderful, warm, outgoing, sharing people they are. And if we can sort of, you know, we look at a person, and why focus on the little things that make us different and focus on the much greater things that we share in common, you know, and we've got to stop being dramatic. and actually get down to being good, decent, ordinary people who actually do best when we actually live in harmony and work together. And that's achievable, you know. And if we're struggling, well, the best way to deal with that is actually find someone you can work with. We're all struggling, and sometimes our struggles actually lock us up in ourselves. But as they say, you know, a problem shared is a problem halved, or something like that, you know. The loneliness that people feel, loneliness can be cured just with a smile, you know, with a hello, you know, instead of a grumpy look. You know, too often we grump at one another. And so when someone does something crazy and starts hooting and shouting at you when you're in your car, well, if you hoot and shout back, well, of course, you'd end up with a confrontation. But if in actual fact you respond in a different way, you can diffuse a lot of that. And I think the stresses that we live under these days, we forget to defuse, and we forget to in actual fact look for those foundations. And you know, again, connection back to the whenua. The land needs us to be well, so let's work on that. And that's the lesson for us. Eh? We think we're it, but this fern is tens of millions of years older, maybe actually a lot older than that. It hasn't changed for millions of years, and we think we're the greatest thing on earth. This fern can do things that I will never be able to do, but I'm better than it. I'm more powerful. You know, I only have the power. What this fern doesn't have is the power to destroy me, but I have the power to destroy the fern. So therefore, I'm almighty. We sort of live in a state of delusion, and we can almost say that in actual fact, it's a lack of. Can we claim to be sane when we believe things like that? You know, we think we're so sane and so wonderful. Well, we're dream merchants, and our key to the future is to stop dreaming and to get real. We are the last of the great species to evolve. We're the babies of the whole family. So stop acting as if we're the masters and the bosses. You know how it is in some families, and you have the children dominate the parents, and really they think they're doing so well, but in actual fact the family falls to pieces. We are the children dominating our parents, the earth most of all, and no wonder the whole place is a mess. You know, and really the key to the future isn't science, isn't technology, it isn't internet connectability and all. The key to it is, in actual fact, stop dreaming and get real. And that's a big thing, because we think we are real, we think we are mature. How can we say we're all these things when all we've succeeded in doing is making the planet unlivable? You know, people, that might sound a bit, well, okay, you go for a swim at Coyote Falls, you know, and put your head under the water and have a good wash, and then ring up the doctor because you've got severe diarrhea. You know, so we think we are so fantastic. All we've done is made a mess, you know, and it's time for us to clean up our mess, you know. And so how do individuals do it? I can't do it, you can't do it, but we can do a hell of a lot. And we've just got to forget the me and concentrate on the we. At the moment we live in a me world. We need to get back by being a we world. And so we look back to the ages of our parents and grandparents and further back. People realised they needed people to get by because life was a struggle. And for a while we seem to think we can manage all by ourselves, taking what we need and ignoring most other things. Those days have finished. We've woken up from our dream. The honeymoon is over, and now we've got to actually see ourselves as a member of the family of life. And the most important responsibility for me is not to look after me, but to in actual fact look after us. You know, because us will succeed whether me or in actual fact. I mean, we're like driftwood, you know, we can float around for a while. Sooner or later we're going to get some waterlogged and we're going to sink. Why is there so much suicide in New Zealand? People have felt that sinking feeling. We would never get that feeling if we were a part of a we. It's just that we become me, and that me world shrinks to an actual fact we can see nothing but darkness. So in actual fact, number one thing, re-engage brain, and that means re-engage common sense. Look around and in actual fact say, hey, I wouldn't be anything but for all those around me. So look after ourselves, all us around us, so that we can move well. And the first looking after we've got to do is the whenua.
Well, I'd like to welcome Dr. Anna Rolleston, Managing Director of the Centre for Health, leading voice in health. She is a recognised health practitioner and health researcher and holds various governance roles within the health sector. She is currently co-director of the Healthy Hearts Aotearoa New Zealand Centre of Research Excellence, hosted from the University of Auckland, which is a collective of researchers, health professionals and community organisations focused on improving heart health outcomes for Maori, Pacific people and women. Anna combines a robust scientific and academic background with an understanding that change comes from within, but that we often need a good deal of support to facilitate that change. So welcome, Anna, and I'll hand over to you, to introduce your topic and then take us through those matters you would like to highlight as part of your presentation.
Cool. Kia ora, Bill. Thank you for that introduction. Kia ora, everyone. So the topic this morning is an environmental perspective on human health, and some people out there will 100% understand the connection between the environment and human health, and others will wonder what on earth we're about to speak about for the next 20 minutes. So what it's really about comes from the philosophical basis that without our planet and without our environment, people aren't going to be well. So we have a very individual focus in the health world. So in the health world, we think about our body and our person, and we go to the doctor because something has happened to our body or we're feeling unwell. And so that's an individual perspective. An environmental perspective on human health is thinking about the environment first and foremost, and having that lead towards better human health. So thinking about aspects of the environment as supporting us to be well, as opposed to the other way around, where we think first about ourselves as in the Maori world, we'd say thinking about ourselves as the tuakana, or the older and the wiser, whereas actually it's the other way around. The environment is the older and the wiser, and we should look after the whenua, the environment, and that will then help us to thrive and be healthy. Does that make sense, Bill?
It does indeed. And certainly if you can just sort of tease out in terms of, you mentioned the environment, and you may be going to cover it, but how we can work with the environment to be more well.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of ways, and it can be as simple as doing your exercise outside, for example. So engaging with nature, going for a bushwalk, walking around Mawao, those types of things. To things that are a little bit more complex and take a bit more time to weave into your life. For example, maybe using the moon cycles or the Māori calendar, the maramataka, to schedule your days, your work life, when you have big events on, those types of things. So really engaging with the environment at the level of understanding that the environment is the place where the natural rhythms start. And what human health is about maintaining the natural rhythms that we have in our bodies, and that's so entwined with the natural rhythms of the environment. So reconnecting with some of the more normal things that the environment provides for us. Like, if it was a perfect world, we would get up when the sun rose and we would go to bed when the sun set. But we have a societal worldview about work and about having to get lots of things done, and so that doesn't work in a modern society. But there are a number of people trying to bring back in a more natural working day based on environmental rhythms, not based on societal expectations of what we should be doing each day.
Okay. And just on that, the environmental theme, what environmental issues do you feel need urgent change or improvement to improve our health?
Oh gosh, I don't know where to start on that one.
It's a big topic, a big question, but yeah, just perhaps 2 or 3 key thoughts from yourself on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this comes from my perspective. I suppose people that are really passionate about the environment will have their own points that are priority areas. And this just comes from my perspective of being in a holistic health space. So I think one of the main things is about considering our nutrition and the environmental aspects of the food that we eat. And that's at one level thinking about packaging and those types of things in the food that we purchase from the supermarket, but all the way through to how do we have a more sustainable way of sourcing the food that we eat daily for our families. So gardening, going back to having a vegetable garden, for example, thinking about how you can collectively perhaps grow food. So most of us don't have a property that we can plant enough things to sustain our families in terms of food, but are there ways that we can collectivize that by grouping together with like-minded families on a patch of land, or to share? So we plant broccoli, you plant cabbage, we exchange them, and you end up with a community garden, but in people's individual houses. So thinking differently about food, I think is really important for the environment, and obviously has a really strong connection to human health. I think the other one is transport. We really love our cars in this country, and I'll put my hand up and say I'm a girl racer from way back. So it's about reconsidering our comfort level with our modes of transport and what impact that has for our environment. Obviously, motorized mechanisms are more convenient for us to get from place to place. But if we think about human health, we need to move more. We don't move enough as a society. And I'm not talking necessarily about structured exercise. I'm not talking about going to the gym and going for a run, but actually just our general everyday movement in life. We're so often perched here in our chair at our desk, and more recently here on a screen chatting to the virtual world, that we could, if we reconsidered transport, we would be more active, we would move more, and we would be more well. And so that's reciprocal benefit for the environment, benefit for us, for our health. So those are probably 2 big ones. Okay,
well, it's probably a nice segue into a next question I wanted to pose, and really related to the digital age. And it's really, what do you think there is a correlation between health decline and the digital age? And given so much more time is spent with technology and devices, how does that affect our health in your view?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question because there's different aspects to it. So if we think about health, and what is health, when you're asking that question, if I take it from a Māori worldview of hauora, which is about all things that make us well, not just our physical body, then actually virtual land, social media, those types of things have positive and negative effects on our hauora. So for example, during COVID times with lockdowns, social media and platforms like Zoom, for example, have been really awesome at reconnecting and keeping people connected with each other when they have been unable to connect physically. And that's really important for our hauora, for our health and well-being, those connections with the people that we love and the people that bring us joy. So there are some real positives about the tech world. I think there's definitely an aspect, and there's quite a bit of research, especially in children, about device time, device use, about sedentary behaviour, being inactive and being on devices all day. Also around the impact of the light that the screen reflects on us and what impact that has on our physiologies. And that comes back to that stuff I talked about in the beginning about returning to the rhythms of nature. This type of light, you know, the lights in the room, the light from our device, they really alter how our physiology responds. And so it's kind of a fake synthetic hormonal response that we get because of the light that we expose ourselves to. So there's definitely some negative impacts of being on devices. And it's really about balance. You know, it's a cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason. Life is about balance. It's not about saying devices, social media, this electronic world, this tech world is all bad and we should get rid of it. It's actually about understanding what we need, what's good for our health, and balancing that out, as opposed to spending, you know, some of us, I'm sure you're in the similar situation, Bill, that we can spend 4 meetings in a row on Zoom, and actually that's not healthy. Even if the conversations that you're having are really invigorating with people that you enjoy being with, it's actually not healthy to sit for 4 hours in your chair. So what do you do to balance that out? Well, you could get a standing desk, and so you're standing and sitting. You could do it more on a mobile, so you're on your phone instead of on the laptop, and you could walk while talking if that's appropriate for the meeting that you're in. But I suppose the overarching answer to that question, it's not so much about technology, it's about society's view about how we should be, act, do in life. And society's view tends not to be an environmental view. And that's where the problem lies, I think, is that we are stuck in the ways of doing things that came from a time that's not relevant now. You know, our 9-to-5 workday, for example, came from a time when that was a good, you know, creating that was a good thing, but actually we want to probably shift the mindset about what work life is these days.
Just teasing that out a bit more, and given the impacts of COVID over the last 2 years, more people working from home, so in different work environments, do you see there have been any sort of positive outcomes because of that change in the work environment overall? And I'm just picking up your comment earlier in terms of transport and travel, where for a lot of people they may not be in their vehicle, say for up to an hour a day in the morning and afternoon commuting, but actually working in that home environment. So I'd just be interested in your views in terms of some of the more positive aspects, if you could say that, in terms of the working from home, given the impacts of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've hit on a big one there about the transport issue. And the first lockdown that we had here in Aotearoa in 2020, there was a little bit of work done about the water quality improvement over those weeks that we were all, fully in lockdown and not driving our cars, and only essential people were out and about. And so it really does speak to how what our impact is on the environment just from our daily routines. So that's definitely a big one. I think the other one that we've noticed with our client base here is the family time, is improvement in family time. We're not so busy, so we've got more time. We're not away from home. We might still be busy, but we're not away from the home environment. And we've had more time to kind of have quality interactions with those that we live with. We've had a lot of people talking about reinstating sitting around the dinner table and having a conversation at night. And that's like, so they might still do their online work and school and all of that stuff, but their one thing is they all have dinner together and have a communal conversation, which tended not to happen previously because people were coming home at different times of the day, not getting that good quality interaction, kind of just the hi and the bye in the evenings and the mornings.
And perhaps just before we leave this particular theme, and you highlighted earlier on in terms of perhaps the societal norms and pressures, the 8 to 5, in this very structured working world, and whether, given COVID working from home, whether that's been a disruptor of some of those norms, and whether there's the opportunity going forward to actually put in some or change some of those societal expectations or norms, given what's happened in the last couple of years, particularly in terms of where people work and communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've noticed a few people lately have underneath their email signatures something along the lines of, I've sent this email first, it's at 6 o'clock in the morning, but I don't expect you to, because this is my flexibility, I appreciate work-life flexibility and this is my work time. We don't expect a reply, kind of thing. And I think that's really nice as well, that's really acceptable, is that work happens at different times of the day now, based on the fact that we've got a whole heap of other things in our work environment now that we never had before, especially if you're working at home. You've got kids at home because school's closed. And so you have to manage life around work. And I think that's a really good thing, because it's also made workplaces, employers more flexible, and understanding that actually workers can get their jobs done, and it doesn't have to be in one big long stretch. And even teams at the moment who are working at home one week and working in the office another week, that's a good thing as well, because that helps us to be flexible. So one of the issues in human health is that we get so stuck in our habits that we find it really difficult to do something differently. So think about changing your diet, for example, can be quite difficult, for people to really get into a new way of eating, because we're such in a habit of what we've always done, and our taste buds like the food that we've always eaten, and our body's used to it, so it doesn't have a strange response. And then you change and it's quite difficult. And I think it's the same thing in our workspaces, is that it's really good to challenge what we've always done. It's really uncomfortable to start off with, but then you're like, oh look, this other thing does work, and it works quite well, and people are happier, and people are able to manage other aspects of their life that they might not have been able to manage so well because of the restrictions around work timings.
Okay. And you touched on earlier in your discussion in reference back to the matters related to Maori approaches in terms of life. So I'd just like to tease out, in your view, what are some of the Kawapapa Maori approaches to health?
Yep, sure. So what I was going to say was definitely there's a Maori worldview on health, but actually it's a whole of person view of health. So we're just really lucky in Aotearoa to have a really cool cultural context to kind of wrap around everything and to have our unique place on this planet and a unique story to tell. But kaupapa Māori, all it really means is it's a holistic view of life and health. So hauora or health is, as I said previously, it's more than just your physical health. So in Western medicine or Western science, we think about you as your body and the things that your body does. And when you're unwell, your body produces some symptoms to tell you that something's not going right. In the medical world, we treat those symptoms. And a Māori worldview or a whole of person worldview about health is that you're more than just your body. And there's a whole lot of other things going on that need to be considered for you to be well. And I suppose some of what we do here at the Centre for Health is around certainly shoring up your medical management and making sure that that's sorted and you're doing the best you can in that space. But then kind of asking the questions that are a bit deeper than that. So why have you got high blood pressure in the first place? Because what the medical system does is it figures out you've got high blood pressure. It is likely to prescribe you some medicine to reduce that blood pressure, and then that's it. But our question is, why have you got high blood pressure in the first place, and what can we do to manage that thing? Because that's a more connected worldview about how to look after yourself and also how to look after the environment. So we know exercise is really good for managing blood pressure, keeping it low, bringing it down when it's high. And so exercising out in the environment is also good for your mental health. So it's about focusing on more than one aspect of health at one time, because that's not how life works. Life isn't siloed into neat little boxes that we just jump in and out of as we decide that we want to. Life is this up and down roller coaster of, amazing times and really bad times, and what a holistic worldview considers is that that's normal. Normal isn't perfect life, perfect health. You do everything perfectly every day. That's not normal. Normal is the ups and downs, and what a holistic worldview does is it helps you to understand that those ups and downs are normal and to manage those ups and downs well.
Okay, and so you've touched on the individual and what the individual can do, but at a community level, what would you see should occur to develop a stronger relationship with nature and improving our health and well-being?
Yeah. I really am a big fan of returning to gardening and getting our hands dirty in the earth, planting, cultivating, harvesting our own kai. And that's almost a lost art these days. When I was growing up, my parents had this ginormous veggie garden. We hated having to go down to help them.
All that weeding, etc.
Yeah, or you had to go and pick the whatever that was ready. That was your job. But I really understand. But back then too, quarter acre section, there was actually the room for that. So I think as a community, if we could figure out how to contribute to each other by supplying each other with food that we've grown, that's a really big, that's a big win. I think, for us as a community. I think the other thing is that as a community, we thrive. As a nuclear family boxed into your plot in your house, we don't thrive so much. So that sense of community as well, whatever that is, how do we cultivate that? And that's not necessarily a job for organisations like a council. It's actually about us trying to figure that out for what works for your little street, for example. How do you create that community where you know that your neighbour's unwell, so you drop something off to help them, or you go and do the grocery shopping? We've kind of lost that stuff. And when it comes to aging and aging well, we know that it's the social connections and the connections with people that are become more and more important as we get older, because that loneliness thing is a real detriment to our health. But we don't have the structures that make it really easy for us to be a community anymore. You know, we've really individualized our homes into our kind of our little territory that no one else can get into. And I think if we can break down those barriers, then we will move forward, because it joins us up and it connects us. And it's all about connections, really. Hold is about connections, the connections that keep us well, whether those are physical connections in terms of how things work in your body, or connections with people, the whenua, nature.
And just my final question before we wrap up the session, and it's more on a personal note. It's really in terms of what motivates and inspires you to do your mahi.
What motivates me? It's a very good question. I have I really believe that people are good, and that we can all have a different way of living our lives, but still be connected above all of that. And a lot of what I do is about helping people to see outside of the sphere that they have grown up in, and that the experiences of their life have led them to see outside of themselves, and to see outside of the individualistic worldview that is Western society. Because once you get outside of that, you see all of the amazing people that are out there that are different to you, and you experience life in a different way, because you're more open to doing different things, not being confined to a rigid and structured way of living. And that we really notice here that helps people to be well, more than the prescription of medicines for their blood pressure, or their prescribing them some exercise to manage their diabetes. It's about being way more open in our world about other people and about the environment, and having it not all be about us. We've got a colleague and friend, Rob McGowan, Pāropata, who is well known around Tauranga for his work with the rongoa Māori, and he says that we as humans, we think we're the be all and end all, and we're so focused on ourselves, and we have to move away from that and to be more focused on the collective of people that are our community and the environment. And that's what keeps me going, because I have some days where it's difficult to do what I do, but actually it's about that big picture, keeping on striving towards that big picture, that society can be awesome, and we just we need to move forward towards that together.
Okay. Well, on that's a really great note to end today's session on. I'd really like to thank you, Anna, and thank you for the thoughtful responses and contributions in respect of this session. I think the messaging in terms of breaking down those barriers and structures and actually taking that wider view and that more community focus, as opposed to perhaps the more traditional people just focusing on themselves within their normal way of life. And I think in terms of people taking personal responsibility, it's not always someone else's problem to address the health and well-being issues. There's a whole lot of responsibility that people need to take themselves. And I certainly like your comment, because we grow quite a bit of our own kai, and it's amazing what you can grow within just pots or small patches within the smaller urban sections that we have today. So on that note, thank you, and have a good day.
You're welcome. Thanks, Bill.